Thank you. I am far less interesting than what Paula just said, and I'm going to prove it to you. Hey, does anybody listen to Tool? Not one?
Yes.
It's been 13 years. So first things first, today the first album comes out from Tool in 13 years. So I'm going to rush through this so we can all go listen to Tool. Okay, so I've got to start with a couple of quick disclaimers that will make some things make sense that I'll say later. Are you all familiar with Tourette syndrome? I have one of the most, I have a very extreme case. You just won't know it right now because I was up at 3 a.m. doing squats, trying to wear myself out so badly. I'm physical and able to perform the tics. If you hear me do something, it's me, not you. If I suddenly go like this, it's because something in me is trying to have a tic once the microphone is close to my mouth. I'm going to give you a brief timeline of what Tourette's has been with me, like for me in a minute. But first, I wanted to tell you a quick story so you understand kind of how I wind up on this side of these microphones. A couple of years ago, I was speaking at a book club in Holiday, and book clubs it's a pretty standard thing around here. It was like 40, mostly LDS women and 3 reluctant husbands. And as I talked, it was all going fine. And at the beginning of the librarian book, this is not what today's story is, but it was the start. It was the start of when I would eventually start doubting enough to leave religion. So at the end of the book, I haven't really taken this stand, but it starts to look like that might be where it's going. Now, I wrote about my family so lovingly in this book that when I speak to a book club, they always want to know, how's everybody doing? Will your mom adopt me? Da, 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 da. And so I'm giving the updates. And as I am talking, this lady raises her hand and she says, I've just got to tell you, you talk just like Satan.
Oh.
So I said, oh, what do you mean? And the room just gasps. I'm like, you have far better secrets than I do, it sounds like. And she says, well, I just feel like you could talk me into anything. I said, oh, okay, what should I try to talk you into? And then she says, no, I just feel like you'd make a great cult leader. And so she's backpedaling and she's backpedaling and she has backpedaled into, I think you'd make a great cult leader. And so I started laughing. Now, this is something I've heard more than once, and it's usually when I give talks, so you'll have to judge for yourself. But it makes me wish I cared about anything enough to round up a bunch of followers. The closest I have to something like that is probably going to be something like today's topic. So a little bit about Tourette's real quick. If you ever see it in the movies or on TV, it's people cursing involuntarily. Now, this is real, but it's rare even in extreme cases of Tourette's. But it always comes down to involuntary movements and involuntary noises, no matter what it looks or sounds like. So mine started when I was in first grade. It was facial twitches. I'd curl my lip. I'd kind of crane my head around. It got vocal for the first time when I was in junior high, and I started going, and for the longest time, I mean, this just terrorized me in school. I did not, like now I can fight in tournaments, I'm a power lifter, blah, blah, blah. I looked like a giant toddler till I was about 28. Like I wasn't a fighter, I wasn't strong, and this was miserable all through school. I mean, I was okay, but it was really rough. Now, it didn't get really extreme until I was about 20, and then I started screaming every 2 to 3 seconds so hard I'd get hernias from it, and I'd have to get the hernias repaired with surgery. And now it has gotten to the point where I'll hit myself and one of my teeth will fly out. Like I'm missing a molar right now because I knocked it out. It's really cool to be able to move powerfully voluntarily. When it's involuntary, there are a lot more ways for things to go wrong. So I got into strongman training and competitions largely because of Tourette's. And I was so used to not having control of my body that once I found weight training, it didn't actually help with the tics, but it was the only time every day where I felt like I was in control of things, of my body. And so with the way I am, really severe OCD, when I get into something, I get really deep. I wanted to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And when I'd hit a plateau, I'd move into a different form of strength, just on and on and on and on. And so I had started a blog. I just called it World's Strongest Librarian because it made me laugh. And it was only supposed to be a blog about my workouts. It could not be more boring. And as Paula kind of said, 2 months into this blog no one was supposed to read, I get an email from Seth Godin, who I was aware of, but that was about it. And his email says, "Oh, this is great. You should be writing a book. I'm sending this to my agent." So 2 days later, for no reason whatsoever, I have a literary agent. I wasn't trying to become a writer. I wasn't trying to become a speaker. I'm good at both. I work very hard at both. But I was a pretty happy librarian. Book comes out about 4 years after that. It took a long time because there had never even been a concept of this book. And so that is more or less how I wound up on this side of the microphone, and where someone like Paula would have heard about me in any way. And so when she asked me if I would come talk about justice, I got really excited right off the bat, because I usually get to speak to giant groups of kids with disabilities, anti-bullying stuff. I teach strongman workshops. I speak a lot of languages, so I'll teach language acquisition stuff. I'm a musician, so I get to perform a lot. But I'm usually playing some version of that librarian character. So it was really great when Paula said, "Do you have anything to say about justice?" And I basically said, "I think so, but I wasn't sure." And I had about a month to get ready. And so my process is always the same. I often don't know what I think or if I think at all. How many of you write? Yeah, you probably have some version of this. You want to figure out if you have opinions, try to write down what they are. You might realize it's not easy to have to admit, wow, I didn't know what I was talking about at all. But with something like justice, that was kind of my starting point. Do I have anything to say? What might it be? What might it look like? And so as I wandered around in it, I just kept returning to the series of workshops I was involved in a few years ago, where I teach a lot of memoir stuff, but I got hired to do 3 different semesters of memoir workshops for veterans. And this was fascinating, and I thought it would be exciting, and I thought it would be humbling, but I had no idea. So every Saturday for 8 weeks, I would go to the center and I would work with veterans. And I thought I was going to hear some hard stories. I had no idea. I mean, I have never heard anything like this. And as much as I love to write, and as good as it is for me, and as well as it can pay sometimes, once I saw these people, I realized, wow, it is a luxury for me to be able to write. These were people who were writing desperately, and people who were writing frantically, people who were saying things like, if I don't write, I'm gonna be doing something worse, and probably to myself. And I heard someone say or write once, all art is the attempt to express something inexpressible. And I thought I had known what that meant, until I started watching people try to communicate what had happened to them and things they had done in Korea and Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan. And every Saturday morning, I would walk out of those rooms almost shaking. And it was just so intense, but it was so good for us all. And these aren't my stories to tell, so I can't give details, but a guy was telling a story one Saturday, and I just blurted out, "That is so unfair." And he looked at me and he said, "What do you think fair means?" And everybody kind of laughed. Words are really important to me, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about today, is that the fact that words mean things, which tends to be something that gets forgotten. And at this point, I had quoted this Mark Twain quote to them over and over and over. And Twain said, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is the difference between the lightning and the lightning bug." And so when I said, "That's not fair," he looked at me and he said, "What do you, Josh, think fair means?" And I laughed and he laughed and we all laughed, and I said, "I'll try to find out." And we just kind of left it there. So I started my process again, and I went and I wrote and I thought, what is fair? What is fair? I'm always reading something by Mark Twain. Have any of you read The War Prayer by any chance? I'm going to read this to you because it'll frame. It's only 2 pages. It is short, but it feels kind of long, which is kind of by design. And then I'll tell you why I'm reading this. So I took this to class and wound up reading this to all of them in response to their question. Okay. It was a time of great and exalting excitement. The country was up in arms. The war was on. In every breast burned the holy fire of patriotism. The drums were beating, the bands playing, the toy pistols popping, the bunched firecrackers hissing and spluttering. On every hand, and far down the receding and fading spread of roofs and balconies, a fluttering wilderness of flags flashed in the sun. Daily the young volunteers marched down the wide avenue, gay and fine in their new uniforms. The proud fathers and mothers and sisters and sweethearts cheering them with voices choked with happy emotion as they swung by. Nightly, the packed mass meetings listened, panting, to patriot oratory which stirred the deepest deeps of their hearts, and which they interrupted at briefest intervals with cyclones of applause, the tears running down their cheeks the while. In the churches, the pastors preached devotion to flag and country, and invoked the God of battles, beseeching his aid in our good cause, in outpourings of fervid eloquence which moved every listener. So basically what happens for the next couple of pages, it's this very patriotic little town. There's a parade. They're so excited to send all the young men off on this adventure. They're talking about how we're just going to go over there and stomp them. It's never said who's fighting or who's they're fighting against. And at the end, they're in a church, and a preacher says a prayer. And he basically says, "Bless us with victory, Lord. Help us go beat them." And the door opens at the back of the church, and a man only known as the Stranger walks in. And he walks up, and he says basically, "I also have a prayer. I'm here with a message from the Almighty. Will you listen to the Most High Messenger?" "Sure, go ahead." And he goes up, and he takes us to the pulpit. And he also starts out by saying, "Grant us victory, Lord, help us win." And then he goes on. I never get sick of this. He says, "Lord, our Father, our young patriot, idols of our hearts, go forth into battle. Be thou near them. With them, in spirit, we also go forth from the sweet peace of our beloved firesides to smite the foe. O Lord, our God, help us tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of the guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out roofless with their little children to wander unfriended in the wastes of their desolated lands in rags and hunger and thirst. Sports of the sun flames in summer and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave and denied it. For our sakes who adore thee, Lord, blast their hopes, blight their lives, protract their bitter pilgrimage, make heavy their steps, water their way with their tears, stain the white snow with the blood of their wounded feet. We ask it in the spirit of love, of him who is the source of love, and who is the other faithful refuge and friend of all that are sore beset, and seek his aid with humble and contrite hearts. Amen." After a pause, and he's talking to the congregation, he says, "Ye have prayed it. If ye still desire it, speak. The messenger of the Most High waits." And the final line in the story is, "It was believed afterward that the man was a lunatic because there was no sense in what he said." So I finished reading that, and the same man looked at me, and he said, "So you tell me what's fair." And he started raising really interesting questions. Is there such a thing as a just war? Kurt Vonnegut has a great line where he said, "There's nothing intelligent to say about a massacre." And I love that the people who are determined to have the adventure are the ones. Do you want my sunglasses? I think you're struggling the most. Okay. I'm not telling you to move. I'm just feeling for you. So that kind of framed the rest of our conversation in that class about justice and war and fairness. And we just kind of had to throw up our hands at the end and say, Sometimes there are more questions than answers. Sometimes there are no good answers. And I don't know if any of you have realized this, but now I'm going to be the only one in the sun. I don't know if you've all realized this, but we've arrived at a rather peculiar political moment in this country. And a lot of the jabbering that goes on is at least allegedly about justice. And again, after Paula asked me if I'd come talk about it, it was hard for me to look at it without thinking about whatever it is that's going on in the country and the world right now, whatever you think that is, and whatever that looks like to you. And I started writing about it again. And I wrote, and I wrote, and I thought, and I thought, and I realized the question that mattered the most to me at the beginning, it's one I will just ask to you. We're all here allegedly talking about justice, at least. In your opinions, what do you think the biggest obstacle to achieving something like justice is?
Truth.
Truth? Empathy? Prejudice? Fear? Power? When Paula and I were talking on our porch the other day, you said something like, when we go to these meetings, we all kind of want the same thing. And my question for myself was, is that true? How do we know that? Can we know if we all want the same thing? Not unless we know what we're talking about. Not unless we actually know we're talking about the same thing. So what I realized is, for me, okay, the right question for me, it's not what is the biggest obstacle to justice or whatever you think justice is. Even for the purposes of this conversation while we're all here, I think the biggest obstacle to justice is that we haven't even tried to define what justice would mean to each of us yet. Back to writing, you might not know. We might have different ideas of what fairness is. We might have different ideas about justice and injustice. I remember a kid came into the library not too long ago, and he knew how much I read, and he was so excited to talk to me about steampunk. And do any of you read steampunk? I barely knew what it was. And so he said, what's your favorite steampunk novel? And rather than pretend I knew, like I named the one steampunk book I could think of, I just said, I'm not sure. And so I went and I did some research, and as far as I could tell, like it's just when goth kids start gluing clocks to themselves, and they wear goggles, like boats, airplanes run on steam. That pretty much looks like all of it. But it wasn't time for the conversation with him yet about steampunk. And I think one of the biggest obstacles we have is too many people have lost the ability to sit down and say, here's what it looks like to me. What does it look like to you? What do we make of that? We've come to a point where if you have a bad idea, in my opinion, I don't attack the idea. I attack you. You're not wrong because I can attack your argument on its merits. You're wrong because you're dumb. You're wrong because you're you. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a woman, you're a man, you're a Muslim. It doesn't matter. I don't think I've ever seen a time in this country where elegant discourse has been so hard to come by in politics. So I want to do the lame thing and just give you a few actual definitions of justice. This is from the Oxford English Dictionary. When I graduated from college, my mom said, I will get you anything you want within reason. And I asked her for a huge full set of the Oxford English Dictionary. Okay, so as far as we can tell, the first written appearance of the word justice as we use it was in 1160. A few of the various definitions from the Oxford: administration of law or equity, maintenance of what is just or right by the exercise of authority or power, assignment of deserved reward or punishment, giving of due deserts, punishment of an offender, retribution deemed appropriate for a crime, especially capital punishment, execution, a place or instrument of execution, a gallows. That one is obsolete now, but that's really chilling. They used to just say, basically, take him to the justice. The justice is what the gallows was called. If you go to Google and just type in Google define or define justice, justice, it just says just behavior. I mean, this just gets us absolutely nowhere. Have any of you read the essay, Politics in the English Language, by George Orwell? This is another short one. If I could bully you into anything today, two things. It would be Orwell first, then Tool, the new Tool album. So it's a 9-page essay called Politics in the English Language, and you're probably familiar with at least the name Orwell, Orwellian, blah, blah, blah. He wrote 1984, he wrote Animal Farm. He was a social critic in England, late 19th century, early 20th. And he was the biggest, clearest advocate of clear speech I've ever seen. He is just my hero. And he would always say things to the effect like, where you find confused thinking or unclear thinking, you will find unclear or sloppy language nearby. Now, it feels like you can make this too dramatic, but I'm not sure you can. He would say things, in his view, choosing the wrong word when the right word was available was something akin to an actual intellectual dishonesty. So I'm going to read you just a quick paragraph from this essay where he's talking about language and fascism. Since you don't know what fascism is, how can you struggle against fascism? One need not swallow such absurdities as this, but one ought to recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language, and that one can probably bring about some improvement by starting at the verbal end. If you simplify your English, you are freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. You cannot speak any of the necessary dialects, and when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious, even to yourself. Political language, and with variations this is true of all political parties, from conservatives to anarchists, is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. One cannot change all this in a moment, but one can at least change one's own habits. And I often think we don't know what all of our blind spots are. Sorry, I can't take it. I was in the bayou the other day, and this just came along at such a time. What's that? Okay. Should have said that 15 minutes ago. So I was in the bayou the other day, and I was writing at the bar with a book. And if any of you were having a hard time, like when you're out, no one will talk to you, take a book. Like within 5 minutes, someone always comes up, "What are you, a poet or something?" Like, cause it's just, you just don't see it. I don't take my phone to a restaurant, and I always get to have conversations like, cause I have a pen. And so I start talking to this person, and she's an anthropologist. And she'd had a little to drink, so she wasn't as sharp as she thought she was. But we're talking, and she's really brilliant. And I asked her, similar to this conversation, because this has been on my mind, I said, if you could change one thing, but I can't. Like, well, bear with me. Like, imagine a genie shows up, and he says, you can change one thing. What do you change that gives you the most bang for your buck? What do we need? And she goes, well, I'd snap my fingers and just ask for total systemic change. Again, like, systemic means something, change means something. They mean nothing when you put them next to each other unless you give them some context. And so I tried to say it again, and she interrupted and said, well, genies aren't real. It was just like again, this is what I think the biggest problem is. Things that look like conversations are not actually conversations. If you can't imagine a scenario where you're wrong, a conversation is not what's happening. And if you have a mind that no longer can entertain the capacity for doubt, in my view, people get to ask in what sense your mind is still a mind. So I'm going to wrap this up, and then we'll do Q&A. You guys can ask me about whatever you want. Paul, how much time do we have? All right, I'll hang out. Okay, 5 more minutes. At the end of my writing in this talk, the question I really wanted to answer for myself was, okay, we talk about the just person, the just society, the genie. How would you build a just society? How could you prove to yourself that that is what you were doing? And I realized that, at least for now, what was true to me is if we all sit down and we try to plan for the just society, the only way we can say that it's actually what we're doing is if none of us know what our place will be in that society. You can't say, here's what would work, given that I'm a 41-year-old white man in Utah. This is the question you should be able to answer, in my opinion. What would a just society be if you had to come up with the rules knowing that I might be a woman in feudal Japan, I might be a gay man in the Ukraine, I might be Christian, I might be in anything. But fair is fair and just is just. And so that is what I would leave you with today, is if you can't answer that question right now, I think that is probably the best thing we could do if we're actually interested in forming some sort of fair, just society, is get closer to being able to answer that question, each of us for ourselves, and then not being threatened when somebody says, well, here's what it looks like to me instead. All right, go Tool. The album's called Fear Inoculum. Thank you. And you guys, you can ask me, I know I have to gloss over a lot of things. If you want to know about Tourette's, if you have questions about writing, I mean, just anything, it's fine. If I don't know an answer, I won't give one.
What's the question again?
Which one?
Your question. Your takeaway question.
Oh, what would be a just society if you did not know what your place was going to be in it? Good. Okay, Jerry works at the library, so she's saying, will you tell everybody a little bit about your book and where you can find it? So the book is called The World's Strongest Librarian. It's about growing up with Tourette's, growing up Mormon, how I got involved in the strongman community, music. It's a 288-page book that refers to almost 300 other books. I do everything compulsively. I read a full book every day. It's about all that stuff. There's a prison riot in Iraq. There's a lot in it. It's one of our library's most highly stolen items, I've been told. I actually run the nonfiction budget. I should probably go blow it all on my book and retire. Yeah. You can find it anywhere. They did a great audiobook as well. It's this very stately old Shakespearean British actor who does the book. And he sounds like me, but the only word he mispronounces in the whole book is my last name. He's also played Aslan in a BBC recording and Treebeard, and he was on Doctor Who. Hanagarne, which is as close as most people get, which is fine. Anything else? Yes, sir. So he said, so your routine is to wear yourself out to not have Tourette's. It doesn't really work. It sometimes is the best I can do. But my tics they're big. They're like it's one of the reasons why I don't get nervous when I talk is because I will have fewer tics during this 45 minutes than any other 45 minutes today. This is kind of when I get to rest. So the tics don't necessarily stop, but I don't have the energy right now to do some of the bigger stuff that I do. I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and fight in tournaments. I train 6 or 7 nights a week prior to lifting at 3 or 4 in the morning, just all trying in that vein. You have great issues. Oh, so do you. Anything else? And I will hang out if people want to talk. Okay, so growing up with Tourette's, did this question of unfairness or injustice come up? Not really, because growing up in the church, and this isn't specific to Mormonism, but I had it because I was supposed to have it. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what was fair or not, or I think more than anyone else, just because it was the way it was supposed to be. And the question was more, what can I learn? What lesson is God trying to teach me through this? What's that?
You still believe that?
No, I don't believe anything happens for a reason. And there's actually great liberation in that as well. Like I believe like people are enough for me. And you'll never hear me say I know something, but I'm not able to believe. I could be wrong. I believe don't be a dick. Be nice. The end. Be better than you were yesterday. Serious. You can do worse, but you can't form a cult on don't be a dick. Or like the Precious Moments calendar people would have way more power than they do. Yes, Quinn.
What if we wanted to read more books that would expand our thinking about justice and kind of tap into some of the talk about today?
Okay, recommendations on this theme, kind of start with the Orwell essay. It's about as good as it gets, honestly. As far as the concept of justice itself, there's a great book out now called How to Be an Anti-Racist that's new, which is really good with the logic. I would read history. Honestly, that's if you say history is boring, you do not know how to read history. History will teach you life is a relentless slaughterhouse. That is what history is. Maybe we can change it, probably not. But if we don't acknowledge it, like we don't have a clear destination in mind, history will teach you more about injustice and unfairness than anything else except that Orwell essay. Yes? Do I have an answer for my question that I proposed? I really don't. I think I would, and it might be a life's work that keeps evolving. I do, if I could snap my fingers, I would want everybody to have an equal opportunity at the beginning. But I think when you try to guarantee equal outcomes, dark doors open. You know, if you try to ensure by any means necessary everything's fair, that can get very draconian. That is, I mean, plenty of authoritarian regimes have fallen on the bad execution of what sounds like a good idea. So no, I feel like I have lots of things that might be an answer, but I try really hard just to pay attention so that once you've decided that you have the answer to anything, if it gets disproven, you have to do some really hard unlearning. I'm more comfortable. I want to be someone who says, the conclusion be damned, I will follow the facts where they seem to go. And for me, that's closer to don't be a dick. One more. Paula? Paula, ask me something. Everyone look at Paula. Okay, thank you all. You're wonderful.